Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great morning this morning. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about animal habitats today, and I'm going to read you a little story called The Forest of ST Shrew. Now, there's not going to be any pictures with this story. There's one little picture of the shrew, but it's a cute little story, so we'll get to that here in just a minute. But if you have never heard of the word habitat before, a habitat is the place where an animal or a plant lives. And not only that, not only where they live, but in this place where they live, they get all the things that they need in order to survive. They have the food that they need, the water they need, the space to grow and to breed and to raise their young, okay? So, different animals have different habitats, and we've talked about that a little bit. A deer's habitat might be a combination of forest and fields because they hang out in both. As there's a plant called a pitcher plant, its habitat is in a bog. That's where it's used to growing at. A humpback whale's habitat can be a stretch of ocean that goes from Alaska to Hawaii. So within any habitat, whether it's a forest, a field, a coral reef, a sandy shore, there are many smaller micro habitats. Now you hear the word micro. Micro means smaller. So within a big habitat, there's going to be even smaller habitats where the temperature, humidity, light, and other conditions may vary from the habitat as a whole, okay? And we'll talk about that here in just a minute so that makes sense. All right, so a forest can be a habitat for all kinds of animals, right? But a micro habitat, a smaller habitat within that forest, might be like a fallen log, okay? So a fallen log is going to be cooler, it's going to be wetter, it's going to be a little darker. It's going to be the air and the leaf litter is going to be different around it. And whereas in a forest, you might have a little small clearing in there that may have more light and it may be drier than the forest itself. So those are two types of microhabitats. And think about the mountains. One side of the mountain usually gets a lot of precipitation. The other side of the mountain is usually dry. So, and one may get more sunlight and less wind than another part. Even in the ocean, the farther down the ocean you get, you have deeper parts of a coral reef that gets less light than the parts of the coral reef that's closer to the surface that gets more sunlight. So even within a habitat, you have smaller habitats within that, and they may get different things depending on the location, the depth, or the height. So plants and animals are often adapted to these conditions within their microhabitat. They are made to live in that little bitty place where they're living at, okay? For example, there are certain kinds of trees and plants that grow well in forest clearings and don't do as well growing where it's shadier in the deeper part of the forest. They're made to grow on the outside of the forest in the clearings and stuff. That's what they are made for. Moss and fungi may be able to grow on one side of a tree or rock, but not on the other because of the difference in light and temperature and moisture. Okay, some animals that live in damp leaf litter, when we're talking about leaf litter, we're talking about all the leaves on the ground, okay? They can live in that pile of leaves on the ground, but they may not be able to survive if they were out on the ground where it's really dry, okay? So even though we have a big habitat like a forest, within that forest you still have little micro habitats that for each animal, okay? So I'm going to read this story to you called The Forest of ST Shrew. But before we read that story, I'm going to introduce you to a few of the characters and describe them a little bit so it'll help you understand the story just a little bit better, okay? So the shrew is one of the smallest, but one of the fiercest mammals, okay? It attacks and it kills prey several times its size, all right? They're young. They usually have 4 to 5 in a litter, are born in a hollow stump or a log or a burrow, and they can fend for themselves when they're only 1 month old. The lifespan is short. A shrew usually only lives for about 1.5 years at the most. The short-tailed shrew with its stubby tail is one of the most common mammals in the eastern woods of the United States. So yes, we do have shrews around here in Tennessee. in Clark County. All right, the millipede. That's another animal or insect that we have here in East Tennessee. We see them all the time. It's a slow-moving, elongated animal. It's long, and it usually comes with 30 or more pairs of legs. A lot of kids sometimes think that they're caterpillars, but these guys are not caterpillars, okay? They're usually found under bark or stones or old boards or anything that's kind of piled up and it's damp underneath it, okay? And their food, what they eat, is decaying vegetable and plant matter. Decaying means it's rotting, so that's what they eat. The adult has a segmented body, has little sections in it, and it has a hard exoskeleton. That means it has like a little hard shell on the outside of it, okay? And that's different from a caterpillar, we know, because caterpillars are soft and they don't have segments in them. All right, so these are not caterpillars. These are their own. They're not going to turn into anything else. They are what they are. They're millipedes, okay? You see these a lot. They're when we see them, the ones that we've seen have been kind of, they have like little red and or brownish segments to it, and then they have a little segment in between that's a little bit darker, but they have lots of little legs and they have that little hard exoskeleton, okay? So that's a millipede. Then we have a nuthatch. A nuthatch is a large-headed, short-tailed, short-legged, tree-climbing bird. We do have nuthatches around here too, that eat insects from the bark of trunks and limbs. It is acrobatic. Okay, it can do acrobats. It can do, like, you know, think about gymnastic type stuff. It can do stuff like that. And it's just as home climbing up and down, around, or down a trunk head first as it is flying. Okay, so it can jump all over the place, but it can fly too good. So nuthatches often are seen with chickadees and titmice, and their wings extend nearly to the tip of their tail. But it says their flight is jerky. Okay, so think about if they hop around a lot, then when they fly, it probably would be just a little bit jerky because they're used to hopping around and stuff, okay? So these are some of the animals we're going to hear about in this story, okay? So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and show you the little picture down here. Here's a picture of the shrew. So he kind of looks like a mole, sort of. A cross between a mole and a little mouse. But anyways, this is a shrew. We do have these running around the woods here in Clark County. Okay. Alright, so here we go. In the Forest of ST Shrew. Jackie sat down with a I don't think anything lives in these woods, she thought. I've been walking around for a long time, and I haven't seen anything except for a couple of squirrels. Squirrels didn't really count. She'd seen squirrels in her front yard, and there were squirrels around the school. She was supposed to be seeing all kinds of interesting, unusual animals to include in her report for school. Pick a place near school or home and investigate what lives there. Then write a report about all the interesting and unusual things you find. That was the assignment. Too bad she didn't live near the pet shop like Renee Navarro. Then she'd have lots to write about. But no, she had picked this patch of woods behind the playground thinking it would be loaded with animals. Now what am I going to do, she wondered. She closed her eyes to think. So, you don't think anything interesting lives in these woods, huh? She heard a high-pitched voice ask. What was that? She gasped as she looked around. Sitting next to her with its head poking out from under the leaves was a small, furry animal with big whiskers and tiny little eyes, and it repeated its question. You don't think anything interesting lives in these woods? Well, I didn't, she answered. Who are you? Everyone calls me ST, he answered. I'm a shrew, a short-tailed shrew. Now put your finger on my back. What? She asked, surprised. Look. You'd like to know about what lives in these woods, wouldn't you? So come on, hurry up. Slowly, Jackie reached out her finger and she gently touched him on the back, and then a flash, and she found herself standing next to ST, looking at him right in the eye. And then she realized that she was standing on 4 legs and she was covered with fur. She had turned into a shrew. There, that's much better, he said. Now follow me. Where are we going? Asked Jackie. A lot of creatures around here are pretty upset that you don't know that they even exist. So I've been appointed to show you around. Besides, now that you're my size, you'd make a tasty meal for something, so you'll be safer if you follow me." And with that, he turned and dove down the hole he had popped up out of earlier. As Jackie stood there wondering what to do, she looked up and she saw a large bird flying overhead. "Uh-oh," she cried, and she dove into the hole after ST. Jackie had never crawled through the ground before and wasn't sure that she liked it. It was dark and damp and it smelled like dirt. And there were so many roots everywhere. Tiny roots were constantly brushing her face. She and ST had to crawl up and over and around large roots and over again, and then all of a sudden ST stopped. "Hey everyone, we're here," he yelled at the dirt walls of the tunnel. At first Jackie could hear and see nothing. Then she noticed a rumbling sound that seemed to be getting louder and louder. Suddenly, heads began popping up out of the tunnel wall. There were earthworms and beetles and white grubs and many other creatures that Jackie couldn't identify. "Do you all live in the ground?" asked Jackie in awe. "Uh-huh, and lots of others do too," said one particularly big earthworm. "But how do you live?" Jackie asked. "I mean, what is there to eat down here?" "Well, you could say I eat my way through the soil," replied the earthworm. "I make a tunnel by eating the dirt and then separating out bits of plants and other fruit from the dirt particles. It's not for everyone, but hey, I love it," he ended. "We suck juices right out of the roots," said 3 white grubs together, "and one day we'll crawl up out of the ground and we'll become adults." "Did you ever wonder what happens to animals that die in the woods?" interrupted a black beetle, waving its antenna back and forth. It's thanks to me that they're taken care of." "He means thanks to all of us carrion beetles," said another black beetle. "We eat them up and we keep the forest clean." As Jackie thought about all this, ST thanked all the soil creatures for coming, and then he turned to Jackie and he said, "Follow me. There's still more for you to see." Jackie followed ST through the soil for a short distance, and then they climbed up to the surface and ran along the ground under a cover of leaves. As they traveled, the leaves crunched and rustled. Jackie could see spiders and centipedes. Be careful of those guys because they'll sting you, okay? And other small creatures crawling around. She wanted to stop and talk to them, but ST kept moving, and she knew she had to keep up with him. Finally, ST stopped at the end of a log. ST ran onto the top of it, and Jackie followed. Most of the top of the log was covered with a thick green carpet of moss. "Ooh," cried Jackie. "It's so soft." "I agree. I love moss." "And look at all the other things growing up here." Jackie ran around top of the log. She rolled in the soft moss, touching the cool, bright orange fungi that were growing on one end of the log and sniffing the tops of tall, red-capped lichens as though they were flowers and had a scent. There was even a tiny tree, only about 3 inches tall, growing out of the log. "Want to see inside, ST?" "Okay," answered Jackie, following ST back over the end of the log. She waited as he called to someone named Millie. In just a few seconds, a long, dark creature with dozens of legs came crawling out of the end of the log. "I'm a little too big to go with you on this part of the trip," ST told her. "You go with Millie, and I'll wait for you here." "But I'm just as big as you are," said Jackie. But just then Millie reared up and touched Jackie's head with several of her legs, and just as before there was a flash, and Jackie turned into a millipede, just like Millie. At first Jackie found it a little difficult to move all of her legs in a coordinated way, but once she and Millie got inside the log, she was too busy looking around to think about how to walk, and she didn't have any trouble at all. Millie was pointing out things and explaining them to Jackie, who was having trouble absorbing all the information. But finally, she began to get the idea that she was in a kind of factory, a factory that breaks a log down into soil. But finally, I'm fixing to reread a part I already read. Everywhere they went, there were things chewing and tunneling and boring through the wood. There were wood roaches, small white termites, hard-shelled pillbugs that rolled into tight little balls as she and Millie went by. There were also insect-eating hunters, huge shiny black beetles with giant jaws, and centipedes with venomous fangs. And at one point, when they crawled deep inside the log, they saw a salamander resting in a dark, damp hole in the decaying log. Jackie had no idea there was so much activity inside a log and was really sorry when they headed back to ST. But after Millie turned Jackie back into a shrew, Jackie and ST said goodbye to Millie and scurried off. Soon Jackie and ST stopped at the base of a tree. Immediately, a small black-capped bird flew down and landed on the leaves next to them. "I was beginning to wonder whether you were coming," said the bird. "Hello, Jackie, I'm Sita. And ever felt like flying?" she asked. Stretching one of her wings over Jackie's head, there was a flash, and then Jackie slowly stretched out her own wings, and she had become a nuthatch, just like Sita. "Let's go!" cried Sita, and she leaped into the air and she flew off. "I'll wait here," ST called after them. Of everything she had done that day, Jackie was sure that flying was the best. First, they flew up over the trees where Jackie could see many of the other birds flying in and out of the treetops. And then she and Sita swooped into the top of one tree and darted in and out among its branches. Jackie was amazed at all the insects she saw. There were grasshopper-like creatures and other bugs that were sitting on the leaves. There were wasps and flies buzzing around, and there were caterpillars crawling on many of the leaves. Then Sita fluttered down and landed on the tree trunk. As Sita led Jackie down the tree head first, Jackie looked closely at the trunk and was amazed at what she saw. There were caterpillars and ants crawling. She saw several spiders and a moth that was almost the same color as the bark. In fact, she almost missed it because it was so perfectly camouflaged against the bark. There was also a pale greenish lichen and moss growing on the bark. Eventually, she and Sita reached the bottom of the trunk. "The tree is like an apartment building or something," said Jackie as she jumped onto the ground next to ST. "There are different things living on it all the way from the leaves at the top to the base right here at the forest floor." She added, "I guess I should say right down into the dirt. I shouldn't forget everyone that I met underground earlier." "Well, it's good to hear you talking about all the things that live in and on trees," said Sita. Then she held her wing over Jackie's head again and flew back up into the trees out of sight. As Jackie once more followed ST through the ground, she began wondering where they could be going next. It was dark and damp in the tunnel, and root hairs were brushing by her face. As they ran along, the smell of dirt filled her nose, and suddenly Jackie opened her eyes. She was back by the tree she had sat down against earlier that day. Somehow, she'd fallen over and was lying on the ground with her face resting on the top of the leaves. Her nose was filled with the smell of dead leaves and dirt. Slowly, Jackie sat up. "Did I dream the whole thing?" she wondered as she looked around. "There's a dead log over there like the one I went through with ST. And the bark of this tree is covered with all kinds of things, just like the one I saw with Sita," she said as she stood up. Still, her adventure seemed impossible. But then Jackie looked at the ground near where she'd been sitting and reached over to the spot that seemed to be where she thought she had first seen ST. As she carefully lifted up some of the leaves, she could see it, a small hole in the ground. Jackie laughed out loud. "Boy, do I ever have a lot to write about in my report," she cried. And then she turned and ran all the way home. Alright, so that was a great little story, wasn't it? Because it shows us that, when we go out into the woods and stuff, a lot of times we're expecting to see deer and bear and turkey and birds and, squirrels and chipmunks and all that stuff. But there's a lot of stuff living in the woods that we don't even think about, like the things that live underground, the things that live in dead logs and stuff. Okay, so we've talked a lot about that when we visit places, that the only thing we should leave behind are our footprints, and that is for sure. We don't need to leave the litter because in this story, none of the animals that we ran across ate litter, did they? Nobody ate trash. So, not only is it the big animals that you affect with trash, but it's also the small animals because they're not used to eating trash. They're used to eating dirt and leaf litter and decaying tree trunks and vegetable matter and plant matter and stuff like that. That's what they're used to eating, not litter. So when you guys go out this summer and you're out on the lake or you're out in the woods hiking or camping, please make sure to not leave your litter behind and don't disturb areas, these little micro habitats. Because when you do that, it's just like when you go and you disturb a bird's nest, sometimes that mama bird won't come back and take care of her babies after a human has disturbed it. Well, it's the same thing with these little micro habitats. If you disturb that fallen log and try to roll it over or something like that, you're disturbing all those little animals in there, okay? So let's be kind, and when you find things in the woods, leave it the way you found it, and don't leave your litter behind. Take everything out with you wherever it is you're visiting this summer, okay? And only leave your footprints behind, all right? Okay, so I have a little craft for you today since we've been talking about the woods and the story about ST Shrew and everything. So I'm going to show you a bird feeder that you can make, okay? So you'll need a can that food comes in, a steel can like corn or peas or whatever. Take the label off of it, okay? And I do have this one right here. You know, there's the top where I opened it up. I could not get the bottom off of this with my can opener. Some cans you can, but for whatever reason, this one couldn't. There was no seam around it, so I couldn't do that. So I drilled a hole right here. Actually, I didn't drill a hole. Actually, I took a hammer and nail and punched a hole through this so that I could string my rope through, okay? But if you can get this hole, if you can get this out with your can opener, great. And if you can't, just do like I did and take a nail and a hammer and punch a hole through it so that you can string your thread through it, okay? So this thread is just stuff that I have had forever and a day that I've used for all kinds of craft projects and stuff, so nothing new on that. I covered the can to make it really pretty with this cool ribbon that I had left over from a craft project that I did. You could paint your can or cover it or whatever, it doesn't matter. Then I took the lid off of a plastic container, and this just happens to be the lid from, I think, a sour cream container, and I cut it in half and I glued it across this end of my can, because then you can fill this can up with birdseed and you can make a cute little bird feeder to hang outside. And then you can watch something. Somehow or another I got it all twisted, didn't I, when I was turning around showing you guys. Alright, so anyways, you can hang this up and you can watch all the birds that come to your bird feeder to eat. And you can, it's called bird watching. You can see all the cool things that live around your house. All the different birds and stuff, okay? So that's a cool little craft that you can make that's a useful craft, and it'll help the animals as well, okay? Alright guys, I will see you all tomorrow. I hope you all have a great day today. Be safe. We're supposed to have some storms and some heavy rain, so just be safe today in all that you do, and I will see you guys tomorrow, okay? Have a great day. Bye.